Welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we are unpacking a truly monumental framework presented by Dr. Christophe Delong and Kinexa Formation, the Universal Dance Notation System. Trying to create a strictly deterministic, highly precise language for physical movement, it's notoriously difficult. But as we'll see, this system absolutely nails it. Let's get right into it. Okay, let's dive into this. Think about classical dance. For literally hundreds of years, it's relied on this finite, universally understood vocabulary. If a choreographer just says the word arabesque, it works like magic. It instantly conjures up this highly precise, totally reproducible image in the mind of any trained dancer. You get the exact posture, the lifted leg, the extended arms. The whole shebang is basically pre-packaged into that one single word.
But, and this is the core problem we're facing today, what happens when you need to describe a movement that doesn't have a name? Contemporary dance, sports, just our everyday mundane actions. Most human movement doesn't live in a neat little dictionary, and without a specific word, you instantly run into this massive wall of subjectivity. Without a deterministic system, you're just relying on guesswork, vague feelings, and honestly, really messy interpretation. We need a rock-solid way to guarantee that if two completely different dancers read a description, they produce the exact same physical motion. Zero guesswork.
So here is our roadmap for making that happen. We'll start with the movement translation problem, then break down the three pillars. Pillar 1 is the what, Pillar 2 is the how, and Pillar 3 is the when. After that, we'll look at building a movement language and finish up with the 5 golden rules.
Starting with Section 1, the movement translation problem, looking at subjectivity versus reproducibility.
When we rely on subjective feelings to interpret movement, transmission gets incredibly sloppy. If things aren't strictly determined, the movement just morphs and degrades like a giant game of telephone. To really show you how much hidden data is packed into a simple pose, just think about what it actually takes to deterministically describe an arabesque if you were banned from using the actual word. Look at this massive block of text. You need a crazy volume of information. The exact degree of the spine's incline, the precise height of the arms, exactly where the gaze is directed. It's a massive aha moment when you realize just how unbelievably dense human movement actually is.
And this brilliantly illustrates our core framework. To actually solve this translation problem and compress all that messy data into something usable, Dr. Delong's system mandates that we answer 3 totally inseparable questions. We call these the 3 pillars of a deterministic description. We've got Pillar 1, the what, Pillar 2, the how, and Pillar 3, the when. And here's the catch. If your description is missing even one of these axes, it is simply not deterministic. It's incomplete.
Let's move to Section 2. Pillar 1. The what, which is the anatomical form.
This first pillar is all about laying down the necessary anatomical vocabulary so we can describe static body positions accurately. Basically, which part of the body is doing what and in what exact configuration. To pull this off, we need a minimal yet fully sufficient vocabulary of body segments. So, we explicitly chop the body up into zones: the trunk, the head and neck, the upper limbs, the lower limbs. Then, we assign basic mechanical actions to those segments, things like flexion, extension, rotation, translation. And you have to define these relative to the ground, relative to the vertical axis of the body itself, and relative to the other segments. It's kind of like defining the pure, raw architecture of the pose.
All right, Section 3, Pillar 2, the how, focusing on the dynamic quality.
So if the first pillar just gives us a static, lifeless mannequin, this second pillar is what breathes actual life into it. It dictates the energy, the speed, the texture. It captures the precise intention and the sensation of the action. And to do this reliably, the system taps into a brilliant analytical framework originally created by Rudolf Laban. Laban figured out that there are 4 fundamental factors that combine to transform plain mechanical motion into expressive, dynamic action. Those 4 factors are weight, time, space, and flow.
Let's look at how tweaking these 4 factors completely alters the delivery of a movement. Take time, for instance. A movement can be sudden, like a sharp, rapid, explosive impulse, or it can be sustained, very smooth, continuous, and progressive. Then we have weight. It can be light, creating this lovely sensation of floating and weightlessness, or it can be strong, fully engaging with gravity, using deep anchoring and heavy pressure. And flow, that determines if a movement is free, basically impossible to stop once it's started, or completely controlled and mastered.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the space factor. Just imagine reaching your arm out in front of you. If you use direct space, your arm moves from point A to point B in a rigid, straight line with laser-precise focus. But
Swap out just that one single Laban factor to indirect space, and suddenly that exact same arm reach becomes a sinuous, curved, spiraling trajectory with a completely diffused attention. You're swapping one single word and it completely alters the entire physical sensation of the move. Absolutely wild.
Moving on to Section 4, Pillar 3, the when, mapping out the temporal structure.
Okay, so we've got our body parts, we've got our dynamic energy, and now we have to organize all these building blocks onto a strict, uncompromising timeline. These temporal necessities break down into 4 specific categories. First up, absolute duration. Is the movement exactly 3 seconds long, or is it 4 beats at 60 beats per minute? Second, sequentiality. Are the arms and legs moving at the same time, or is there an overlap? Third, we have to map out accents and pauses. And fourth, we define the musical relationship. Does the movement lock in and synchronize with the music? Does it act in counterpoint? Or is it existing totally independent of the sound?
Let me give you a really concrete example to illustrate this. Imagine a movement that starts right at 0 seconds, where just the head drops. Then, at exactly the 1 second mark, that movement propagates in a fluid, wave-like sequence down the cervical and thoracic spine. Boom, at 2 seconds. The hips engage. And finally, at 4 seconds, the wave completes downward right through the legs. That, right there, is the when pillar in absolute deterministic action.
Section 5, building a movement language. And crucially, we're talking about natural syntax here, not computer code.
Because when you look at all this intense detail, you might be thinking, wow, we're basically just writing rigid mathematical software code. But we aren't. This proposed system functions way more like a flexible, structured natural language. It has its own basic vocabulary of movement words, a grammar made entirely out of our 3 pillars, and a very clear syntax. And thanks to this natural language structure, we can actually build a lexicon of reusable vocabulary. That way we aren't writing giant novel-length paragraphs every single time someone moves an inch. I mean, traditional ballet did this perfectly with words like plie, right? Which just means bending the knees with a sustained, controlled quality. But this system lets us create those same kinds of terms for literally any style. Take the Martha Graham modern dance technique, for example. The word contraction in that technique is essentially a pre-packaged deterministic shortcut. It means pelvis in posterior tilt, spine in deep flexion, strong qualities, sustained becoming sudden. Boom. It is incredibly efficient once you set the vocabulary.
Let's move to the next slide and see how this builds out. This all scales up into 3 economical levels of precision. Level 1 is your codified vocabulary, just saying arabesque. Super simple. Level 2 is modified vocabulary. That's where you take a base word and specify a variation, like saying arabesque at 45 degrees with a strong quality. And then level 3 is the complete description, where you are fully breaking down every single anatomical detail across all 3 pillars right from scratch. Having this scalability is a game changer because it makes the system universal for literally any dance style, sport, or movement practice in the world.
Wrapping up with Section 6, the 5 golden rules for achieving deterministic fluency.
All right, so here is your ultimate checklist. If you want to guarantee that your written movement description is absolutely foolproof and universally reproducible, you've got to follow these 5 golden rules. Rule 1, always specify the what, how, and when. No exceptions. Rule 2, give relative positions to the ground and the body axis. Rule 3, always provide strict durations. Rule 5, use Laban vocabulary for qualities. But actually, let me back up and heavily stress rule number 4 here. Never assume the reader will just understand what you mean. Listen, if a detail is not explicitly written down on the page, it simply does not exist in the movement. End of story. You must always prefer having way too much precision over not enough.
So the crucial point we're taking away today is that this system genuinely turns the absolute chaos of physical motion into a highly readable, universal blueprint. It really forces us to look closer at what our bodies are actually doing. Think about it for a second. Using the anatomical what, the dynamic Laban how, and the strict temporal when, how would you deterministically describe something as totally mundane as your own simple daily walk? What are the hidden complexities hiding in your own everyday motions? Keep that question in the back of your mind the next time you're just taking a stroll, and as always, keep learning.